Testing the English, testing the English, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I've had a busy morning today. So I'm sorry about starting later. I hope you can hear me. Testing the English, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing the English. Okay, good.
Nge po me dembe de bagayin ba chungling wenye de prasechene yanda sula nye be du shu chi tenla nye pra zodir sovande chedan raji kanama du che danan dambe che so jebana Vindra Shiru Gyuba Nisi Tun San Li Shi Domdir Sohande Dedan Dengi Duma Tamji Pa Yon Singi Shilin Chunsin Tongme Meba Kongbe Pichon Tebe Paru Sendir Sohande Sende Chanjuru Yinbe Webe Si Samin Brayni Neradote Chelo Seba Cheve Namdaraji Kumi Chemba Dendir Sovande Chambe Loji Niji Donshu Tanjawa Meba Ngi Jona Brata Tome Gyoda Jelada Gyoshi Medange Bra Sindri Soa Nyemonge Lo Giji Medon Shi Kati Shaya Nibu Chulunchi Keve Nganzu Sambo Medon Vi Shinyin Penzi Gandri Soan So Sora Dena Nyamjani Rangi Sosura Jebe Shiragi Shiro Jesu Jubra Misheba Ngedin Tambra Jete So Chimburu Chala Zishi Jishi Loi Mena Daba Nanji Sanjirane Gela Jove Lodrö Givedi Nyosong Ora Zede So Tedra Yende Jelege Kanto Yende Jebe Chashi Jebe Lusen Tende Bagama Baye Gomba Zonji Sho Sangye Chedan Soye Shonam Lo Chencho Bando Dane Yesus Tage Junye Gibe Sanam Ye Drola Ben Sangye Drubra Jo Sangye Chedan Soye Shonam Chencho Bando Dane Yesus Tage Junye Gibe Sanam Ye Drola Ben Sangye Drubra Jo Sangye Chedan Soye Shonam Chancho Bado Dane Gyosut Dagi Jingi Gibe Sanam Ge Drola Ben Sangye Drubra Jo Chanse Wanan Chiji Shabat Jeso Yera Gushi Sewa Gewa Jose Dagi Jesa Ba Tamje Dam Chanju Jemo Sashi Buji Joshi Medo Reja Venishi Ninde Gemba Sangye Shindo Mede Buai Droge Nanda Jinla Jebra Jo Simje Namye Samba Loye Jera Jida Shizhon de mon de baye chege golo golo so.
We are currently having a little technical problem.
Oh yeah, 다 징도 고대 생도
Now, can you hear me? So, first of all, I'd like to wish you all my greetings. So, today I would like to give a brief introduction to the Karma Great Encampment as it is related to Gyalmikya Dorje's liberation story. So today I will give a bit of a historical background to it, and then next week I will speak about the actual Great Encampment. So actually, I forgot to recite my prayers, so I'll recite my prayers first.
다 되려요. 다 가르친스 라비 understand 다 가르친스도
When you say Great Encampment or Garchen, well, what is a Great Encampment? What do we mean? So note the Tibetan word gar, or encampment. In the old days of Tibet, when people would travel far from home or to another region, they would stay, the places they'd stay in would be tents made of the hair, the fur of their livestock or fabrics, and they'd have many tents set up together, and they'd call this the guard or encampment. When you say, they'd also say to pitch an encampment, and that means they'd put a lot of tents together to make an encampment. For example, when we call a group of many military tents, we call it a mat guard or an army encampment. Or a group of merchants tents would be called a tsonggar or a merchant encampment. When there was tents were set up for lamas and monastics and people who gathered for Dharma purposes, it was called a chugar or a Dharma encampment. Like for these days, we speak about like the Tseta chugar or the Yachin chugar. But here when we talk about the word gar or encampment, it primarily means a group of tents, whether they're made out of animal hair or fur, or whether they're made out of fabric. So that's what it originally referred, but later the group of houses could also be called gar or encampment. So I think so that an encampment probably means like a camp with many different tents. When you talk about it as a garchen or the Great Encampment, we say we had the extra word chen, or great. What that means is that it means the size of the encampment, or because of the encampment is well known. And so it's called like the Great Encampment, the large encampment, for that reason. Later, the encampment was also called the Karme Garchen, and the reason for saying was this, that there is a direct relation between the Great Encampment and the Karmapa. Also, sometimes the Karmapa and his heart sons are called the Garpa Yabse, or the master disciples of the encampment. But this is probably a term or a way of calling them used by other lineages. Within the Karma Kamtsang itself, there is no real tradition of calling them the Garpa Yabse, or the master disciples of the encampment. Likewise, the early and later Tsampa lords were called the Depa Garpa, or the Depa encampments. This is because they were patrons of the Karmapa. The one was the Karmapa was the guru, and they were the patrons, and so they're called the Depa Garpa. But it doesn't mean that there was actually a direct connection between the Tsampa lords and the Great Encampment. So when we talk about the Karme Garchen, or the Karmapa, or Lodrö, so what is the direct connection between them? So how are they related? So if we were to explain it in like contemporary terms, we say the Karme Great Encampment, or the Karme Garchen, this is what would be like the company that does Mikyo Dorje's work. And Mikyo Dorje, Mikyo Dorje to be like the chairman or the CEO of the company. So it'd be like the CEO or chairman of the company. And the Karma Encampment would be like the corporate headquarters of the Karma Kamtsang. So it's like the headquarters. And so the Karma Great Encampment. So now in the Tibetan tradition, we talk about a Ladrang in Tibetan, right? But I think a Ladrang and the Karma Garchen are a little bit different, because a Ladrang is like the residence of a lama with some status, or the organization of people who serve to support the livelihood of such a guru. For example, if there's a lama tashi, his ladrang would be the office that was connected directly to lama tashi privately, so to be their office. The Garchen was directly connected to the Karmapa, but it wasn't the Karmapa's private office. It was an organization for administering or organizing the Karma Kagyu overall. And for that reason, the Garchen is a little bit different from a Ladrang, as I see it. So when did the Great Encampment first develop? It's difficult to say exactly what time it started. But if we ask, was it present from the time of the first Karmapa Düsum Khyenpa? I think I'd probably say it didn't exist at that time. Because during his day, at first, Düsum Khyenpa was an ordinary monk or lama. It's only toward the end of his life that he became well known and became a great lama. But before that, he primarily practiced in mountain retreats. And when he traveled, he would probably travel alone or with 3 or 4 students. And I don't think he brought a large group of people along with him, because when you travel in a large group, you need houses, you need fodder for them, you need food and clothing, you need a lot of supplies, and tents and so forth. And so I think at that time it would have been difficult to assemble all of those things that you needed. The second Karmapa, Karma Pakshi, and the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, both traveled to be gurus to the Mongol or Yuan emperors. But if you think about them, with the Karma Pakshi, he himself just lived a really yogic lifestyle, like an ordinary lama, and I don't think he lived a very elaborate lifestyle. Similarly, the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, probably spent his time writing treatises and doing meditation practice in isolated places. I don't think he traveled much otherwise. Of course, he traveled, but I don't think he did it in an elaborate fashion. So if we then kind of guess when the Karma Garchen encampment initially developed, and how can we know about this? Karma Trinleypa wrote in his Questions and Answers, The Brief Meaning of Liberation Stories. And when he spoke about the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, what he said is that the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje was really assiduous in his practice of the Vinaya. And you see also, so from this time, the encampment became more impressive and organized. So if we extrapolate from what he says here, so before the time of the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, there was some sort of an encampment, but it was only during the time of Rölpai Dorje that it became larger in size, and it's also in its organization became more regulated. And so in this way, I think it's that's only at that time that it became like a Garchen or a Great Encampment. In any case, the author of this, Karma Trinleypa, was a student of the seventh Karmapa Gyatso. And the time of the seventh Karmapa, you could say that is the time that the Great Encampment was at its height. And so I think we should take Karma Trinleypa's words as a solid basis for an account of the encampment. And so for that reason, when we talk about when we want to determine when the Garchen, the Great Encampment, it originated, then we must take Karma Trinleypa's words as an important source. Now, a modern scholar named Dungar Lobson Chinle says that the actual organized encampment developed during the time of the seventh Karmapa Gyatso, and that one should read the history of it in the Karma Kamtsang Water Crystal of the Moon. But I think when he says this, is this because it was during the time of the seventh Karmapa Gyatso that the encampment was at its height? And I think that is the reason why he said this. But otherwise, the Great Encampment, if you said it in general, did it develop at that time? I don't think that is quite right. But because there is no clear indication of the origins and development of the Great Encampment in the other histories and biographies, I think that's probably why he said this. And so I think, and because he couldn't find any other sources, I think it's understandable that he thought this. But I think that, so I didn't, aside from just these words of Karma Trinleypa, I could not find any clear account of the origin of the encampment. And there's also a great scholar named Thubten Phuntsok who said that when the Chuje Rölpai Dorje, the fourth Karmapa, went to China and was returning from China to Tibet, many of the faithful monastics and lay people he met on his way could not bear to be apart from their guru and followed him as far as Tsurpu. When they arrived in Tsurpu, they set up an encampment near the guru's residence. And they spent their time striving at spiritual practice in accord with their abilities. And so this is the origin of the Karmapas Dharma encampment, he writes. I've spent several days looking through many Kagyu Dharma histories and biographies to find any such clear description of the development of the encampment as he describes, but I have not found it. So I think he must have seen some old historical or biographical manuscripts, or maybe extrapolating from this or this from other evidence. But at the present, I'm not sure which of these two it is. In any case, if we look at the words of Karma Trinleypa mentioned above, we can see that it was during the time of Rölpai Dorje that an encampment that covered a large area and that was organized. So that's the time when such an encampment first developed. But I think it is imperative to say that there was some form of an encampment during the times of the earlier encampments. There are clear mentions of the encampment in the liberation stories of Rölpai Dorje, written by the Kunpang, Kunga, Lodrö, and the Karma Shönnu. They mention the words Garpa and Gar clearly. So since the Great Encampment is related to Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, I will talk about the life story of Rölpai Dorje, but it's not necessary to explain the whole thing in detail. Rather, I would like to just summarize the important points, to give you the very important points. Now, the previous Karmapa Rölpai Dorje's predecessor was Karmapa Rangjung Dorje, and he passed away in the Mongol Emperor's palace in Sanadu. So during the Yuan dynasty, there's an old and new capital, and Sanadu was the old capital. And so so the third Karmapa told Taiyun Guoshe, now I'm not sure of his actual name, that in his next life he would be reborn in the eastern region of Kunpang. And so according to that, Karmapa Rölpai Dorje was born in an area very near the place of Kunpang. Now I would like to show this to you.
Oya, ta da revedo di jidang nge kasang ma ji shui simbi ba. Ta yimbe
I've already to explain this about Rölpai Dorje, but to remind you, the place he was born was Namzon, Ngua in Gochunpak Namzon, but in these days this is called Alankan Jiagong Bianba and Changdu. That was his birthplace, and his father's name was Sunam Dundu, and his mother's name was and he was born in the to the mother Zumza Atsund in the Iron Dragon year, and he passed away at the age of 44. Now, Karmapa Rölpai Dorje was born in Ngue Alarong. And so after he was born, the person who recognized him as Rangjung Dorje's reincarnation was Tokten Gumpa Gyaltsen. Now, Rölpai Dorje had his primary gurus, or among them were Gyalwa Yungtenpa, who's in the main lineage of Kagyu gurus. But in addition, there was also Toten Gumpa Gyaltsen and Toten Dar Gyalwa. So these were the three primary gurus of Rölpai Dorje. And he took both, went forth and took full ordination from the Dunduk Pa, the Kenshin from Gendung Gang. And he was given the monastic name Zamling Chukye Drampa. And so we read, when we see the name Zamling Chukye Drampa in text, that is the name of Rölpai Dorje. And so he was very strict about Vinaya discipline. So he was very strict about that. And so all of his intendants were also very very strict about the discipline, monastic discipline, and they also lived only on the three white types of food: milk and sugar and butter and so forth. And if they saw anyone even with meat or bones, they'd magically criticize them, and they would not allow any meat or alcohol in the encampment at all. So there's a very, very strict discipline in the encampment. So you said an even stricter discipline, even stricter behavior, and the behavior of the students was even better than was even pure. Another feature of Karmapa Rölpai Dorje is he had the ability to do emanations in his dreams. Now, one example of this, for example, he couldn't read so many texts all at the same time, but what he would do is he would put many texts, put many texts around him, to just leave them all open around him, some onto the right side, some on the left side, and open up many texts, and he'd leave them around him, and then he'd go to bed, go to sleep. And when he was going to sleep, in his dreams, he would emanate many different bodies, like 15 or 16 bodies of Rölpai Dorje, and they'd read the texts. And when they read the texts, then when he woke up from the rest, he would know everything that was said in all of those texts. And so it was, since he has such great power over lucid dreaming, that what he said is that the way I have lucid dreaming, there's no difference between from how illusionists create different illusions. And so it's it's really easy for me to have lucid dreams, to make emanations in dreams and so forth, just like the skilled illusionist can make illusionists. Also, Karma Trinleypa also said that he had a really strong innate knowledge, and so he didn't have to study much. But he didn't have to study, but he did do a fair bit of study. And so among all of the Karmapas before the 8th, he was the one who knew the middle way and validity best. And in terms of his poetry, there was none who was better than him at writing poetry. Actually, if we think about it, Karmapa Rangjung Dorje wrote the 100 Jataka tales, which fills out the 34 story Jataka tales that were famous in India. And everyone says that that's a really beautiful text, but Karma Trinleypa says that it was Rölpai Dorje who actually wrote the best poetry. And among his many different students, he had the first was the Shamana Kachawongpo, but he had many amazing students. Then in 1356, in the Fire Monkey year, the 14th emperor of the Yun dynasty, so according to our Tibetan histories, we call him the 14th emperor. This is Tolkun Timur and his son or prince Ayushadhara sent offerings and an invitation to him. So he received that invitation. If I'd like to show you now, this is Tolkun Timur. So many histories say that he's the 14th Khan of the Mongol emperor. Some Chinese histories say it's the 15th, and so he was born in 1320 and he lived until 1370. And so we don't need to speak about the years of his reign. And this is his crown prince, Ayush. These days we would call him his crown prince. So in it would be called a wantai in Chinese. And so they sent great offerings and the invitations. So at the age of 19, Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, on the 5th month of the 1358, he left Surpo and traveled via the northern route. As I mentioned before, when you go to eastern Tibet from central Tibet, there's a northern route and a southern route. So he took the northern route. And in particular, he saw along the way, he stopped at Karma Monastery and Hlateng. Now, in the Dharma history of Feast for Scholars, it explains that around this time, the 5 yogis, in the old days in Tibetan that are called zogis, but the 5 yogis came from India. They came to see the Karmapa Rölpai Dorje and said we are going to Wutai Mountain in China. And so this is they gave him a statue or a representation, an image carved from the Bodhi tree by Nagarjuna, they said. And so they said, now until all 5 of us get together again, please don't give it to anyone else. So the name of this is called the Jo Gondola. We can call it the Jo Gondola or the gondola image. Now the people who offered it to him said that they were the emanations of Dharma protectors, but they left, and yes, under the yogas, so they just disappeared without a trace. And from that time on, the gondola image became the primary shrine or the primary representation. And they would exchange the offerings every offering. We usually do it every day, but he exchanged the offerings every session. And in the 4 sessions, he would prostrate to it and circumambulate 4 sessions a day. And so this made a strong impression on his entourage and also inspired them to practice virtue. But however, when we look at the old liberation stories of the 4th Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, it's not so clear when the gondola was offered to him. But according to the Feast from Scholars, it's probably around the time when we went to Hlateng and Karma Monastery. Now please look at this tanka. This is from the Kagyu lineage tankas that are kept at Palpung Monastery. This is the 4th Karmapa Rölpai Dorje. And look at the side. There are a few people wearing Indian clothes and carrying something like sort of in the shape of the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya, right? That's it. That is an image of the gondola. But as the gondola, when you talk about it, became the main shrine or the main sacred object in the encampment. And the reason why it's called the gondola is that in India, they call temples where the Buddha stayed by a special name Gandakuti or Gandalaya. So they had a particular term and name for the temples where the Buddha had stayed. And then I think that gondola is probably a corruption of that. It's a kind of a corruption of that word. In any case, when you translate gondola into Tibetan, we would call it the fragrant temple. In any case, the gondola became the primary shrine for the successive Karmapas. And when they took their novice or full ordinations, they would take it in its presence. For example, if we look at the liberation story of the 7th Karmapa by Goshe Paljor, what he wrote is that the supreme support for the meditation, the successive incarnations of the bear of the black crown, the emanations of the 6th Guru, and so it's called the Jo Gondola. In the presence of this unrivaled image, a clear carving of 1,000 Buddhas in the amazing material of Bodhi wood, a wonder supreme Ganda temple, the hair of the great being who was our guide was cut. And so what this is saying is that the 7th Karmapa Chodajatsu had his hair cut and took the novice vows in front of this shrine, or the gondola. And I think that it's from the time of the seventh Karmapa that the tradition of making elaborate arrangements to the gondola began. There are many different offerings, so they had a tradition of doing different types of offerings, some larger, some smaller. And I think that this tradition began at the time of the seventh Karmapa. No, I'll give more of an explanation about the gondola next week when I speak about the Great Encampment. But one good thing that happened is that a few days ago, I received a text called a Catalogue of the Gondola, the Supreme Image of the Great Encampment by Shamar Kuncha. And here it says that the main sacred object of the encampment, the gondola, has 7 excellent qualities. So it says it has 7 excellent qualities, and the 7th are as an excellent material, excellent image, excellent maker, excellent origin, excellent power, excellent activity, and excellent blessings. And so he describes the gondola in terms of it having these 7 excellent qualities. To say the first thing, not instead of reading it, I'm just going to explain it all. The excellent material, what that means is that the gondola was made from wood from the Bodhi tree in Bodh in the region of Magadha. So that is why it's called excellent material. The second is the excellent image, is that there's the Mahabodhi. There's the Mahabodhi statue, right? And then there's a shrine, the Gondolaya temple built by the Emperor Ashoka built around it. And so this is what it is. And you can see the design of this is that the Mahabodhi statue is inside. And when people and it's the image is that you're looking at it and seeing the statue through the door. You're seeing it through the door. So I'm going to explain it in greater detail later. Now, the third and fourth excellence are on a missing page, and because there's a missing page, you can't read it. So I'm not able to explain these. And so the third is the excellent maker and the excellent origin. They aren't here, so I'm not able to describe them now. Now, the fifth is the excellent power. Now, the excellent power is that wherever the gondola was brought, the ground would tremble, the lightning would flash, and all fires, floods, and poisons, weapons, illness, hunger, and conflict, and so forth would pacify those that had happened would be pacified, and they would not occur in the future. And the sixth is the excellent activity, which means since the Karmapa is the embodiment of the activity of all the Buddhas, and he made the gondola his shrine, and he prostrated to it and offered things to it. So it was he brought it to many locations in India and Tibet, and it brought benefit to many sentient beings. Now, the seventh is the excellent blessings. The excellent blessings means that, as in the Prajnaparamita Sutra say that people who come into the area, inside all the sentient beings who enter within the fence that marks off the area around the Vajra seat in Bodh will not be harmed, except as a full ripening of karma. Now, since the gondola was made out of wood from the Bodhi tree, and because that's the material was made out of, it had the same blessings as the sacred place of Bodh. Likewise, a second aspect is that instead of making mandalas of another deity, if you did the self and front visualizations in the presence of the gondola, it had stronger and faster blessings. And so that is how the gondola is described. Now, we don't hear about the gondola these days, do we? We've never heard of it, right? So where did it end up? So this is probably during the time of the 10th Karmapa, when Gushi Khan destroyed the Great Encampment. It's probably after that we no longer heard of it. There's not much about it. You don't really hear about it in the histories. There's the primary secretary of the 16th Karmapa, Rinchen Palsang, during the time that the 16th Karmapa was in Tibet. And he wrote a catalog of the articles in Surpu, and he says that he was confiscated by the regional lord. So basically, the lord took it away. The Tibetan government took it away, is what he said. But when I spoke with people from the entourage of the 16th Karmapa, they had nothing to say about the gondola. But there is something, and what that is, in the 1970s, there are some people who, their names Nick Douglas and Merrill White. So these two people wrote a book in the 1970s, and the name of this is the title of the book was The Karmapam, the Black Hat Lama of Tibet. This is the book. This book was published in 1976 in London. And so London in Great Britain. So they went to do interviews with the Karmapa and his heart sons in Sikkim, and they also took pictures at that time. And then there are some pictures of some of these sacred objects brought with the 16th Karmapa from when we fled Tibet. And one of them, there was something. There's an image made. They said that there was an image of the Buddha made by Nagarjuna with the images of the Buddha's deeds and temples. And so now I'll show you the picture of it. They said it was given to the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje. And so here it's written in it. And what it writes is, it says, this is the statue of the Lord Buddha. And it says that on the back there's miraculous events of his life. It says they were presented to Karmapa Rölpai Dorje by 5 Indian holy men, basically whatever it says. And so it's given, it says that there are 2 that were given to by Rölpai Dorje, but this is one of them. So here they say there are 2, but there's only 1. There's no question of being 1, so I don't know why they said 1. But it said basically that it was given to Rölpai Dorje when he was on his way to China. The maker was Nagarjuna, they say. So that's what it says. And when I look at this picture, I've seen it many times, and I read the old histories, I think this must be the statue, this must be the gondola itself. I do think that must be it, but there are also the catalogs, the artifacts from Surpu Monastery. There are also the histories. And there are also oral histories of. There's no mention of this being the gondola at all. No one says this is the gondola. And I think about what might be the reason why they don't say it's the gondola. And to be, first of all, because it's really historical significance of the gondola, and because of its being the main sacred object of the Great Encampment. I think they must have worried that in the old days that the local lords would take it away. And so they downplayed it. They just downplayed its importance and didn't use the name, the gondola, for it. And so instead of saying gondola, they said there's something from Nagarjuna and so forth. But if there's someone who knows more about it, I hope they can give more explanation. I think that this must be the gondola, because the reason for this is the gondola, and so this is the statue of a temple, and so it does look like it's in the image of a temple, right? It's like the image of like a monastery. And it's said that it's like the image, and it said that the gondola is like the image of looking through a door at the image of the Buddha statue through a door. And so I think if you look at it, the same. So I think this probably is the gondola itself. But if anyone knows about this, I hope they can give. It'd be good to give more explanation of it. So that's it. And then Mikha Dorje continued traveling to the east, and he went through Ling and Che, and Chu and Ling. In these days, we talk about the region of Lingzang. And he came to a place called Machu Lingpu. So Machu Lingpu. And so it's a place where it's like at a bend in the Machu River. And he went to this place, and it's probably in the present-day Amdo region. And he sat on a throne made of stones and taught a lot of Dharma there. And then after he taught all this, the next summer, at the base of the throne where Rölpai Dorje had taught the Dharma, this flower grew. And this is a flower that they had never seen before. It had one stalk and then 8 branches. And each of the branch had 8 flowers. And each of the flowers had 1,000 yellow petals. It had a red corona and a yellow center. It was a really strange flower. And everyone who saw or heard of this flower was amazed. And at that time, there was a geshe named Kyura Tumpa. And he said, this is really amazing. Such a flower was understood. And he thinking that it helped people develop faith. He couldn't take, of course they had no pictures. They couldn't take a photo of it. He drew a paint of it, or maybe he somehow took a pressing or something of it. At any rate, he made an image and he wrote the story and distributed it widely in many regions. And when they did so, then everyone who saw that picture was said to have developed faith in the histories. Then Rölpai Dorje went to Kagyu on the border between China and Tibet. Now, this is probably in the region of Gansu province. Now, the Yuan emperor had sent a large party to escort him, but there was a time at that time there was a conflict in China, and so he realized that there was conflict, and he thought instead of going, he went up through to the western Xia, and so near a place we call Kanting these days. And there were a lot of different disputes in that, and so and with all this, he resolved all the disputes and made everyone promise not to fight for 25 years. And once again, he received a summons from the emperor, and if you don't, then you've sent many people, and all these people who will probably harm the monasteries and so forth. And so for that reason, think of the Buddha's teachings and as emperors of China, and please come. Because this letter arrived, then Karmapa Rölpai Dorje saw that it was the right time to go. They went to Lintao Monastery. And at Lintao there was a monastery founded by Dogen Chögyal Pakpa. It's probably where Dinchen Monastery was. There was a Khenpo Palden was there. Now there's also the Mongol king emperor who had invited Sakya Pandita. There's the Sakya Pandita's Trulpe Monastery. So we're talking about larger. And this is when you talk about the 4 monasteries of Sakya Pandita, one of them was the Trulpide in the east. So this is the eastern Trulpide, and so he went to there. And then he went to Minyan and went to Gandu. So this is probably western Xia. It used to be a very powerful kingdom. And he taught the taught the Dharma to people of many different nationalities. And so for on the right side, he put the Mongol translator. On the on the left, on the back right, he put the Uyghur he put the Uyghur translator. On the left side, he put the Chinese translator. And so he had these three translators, and then the translators would translate whatever Rinpoche Dorje had said. And so he was able to teach the Dharma to many people. And then as he was traveling, Rinpoche Dorje got a cold. And he said, what should he do? And everyone was worried, what should he do? And Rinpoche said, it's not going to be bad. I'll have a lucid dream, and during that dream, I'll be able to cure my illness. And so then he went. And he told, so his said to his main attendant, when I go to bed, don't wake me up. So he did, as I said, he did all of his work in his dreams, right? So he got he didn't take medicine. He would just go and he'd take care of it in his dream. So he said, don't wake me up. And he'd lie down to go to sleep. And after he slept, and when he woke up, his cold had completely cured. And so his attendant, Gurugum Rinpoche, said to him, and Rinpoche Dorje said, in my dream, I went to the Potala Palace and saw a red chen, and he was holding a vase of Amrita nectar in his hands. And he gave the nectar of Amrita to me, and I drank it. And after I drank it, then I had this really experience of bliss, clarity, and non-thought, and my cold was cured. So he cured himself in his dream. It's probably better to take a break here. So we'll take a break at this point.
Dharma Nam Samudra Sabarana Samye Ayun Didarachibai Burve Semchin Kun Sozo Dipjan Jan Chum Delaidu Kurde Nyamni Keme Cheki Kudrimende Wachem Burulingidu Dagira
어느 승대
Can you hear me?
또즈 마데르 차제 디 가르슈르디 the 树莓 game 直接下
I'm feeling a bit out of sorts. I don't have much energy, but I'm probably okay. I'll feel better as I go along. Now, in the year of the rat, in 1360, on the 12th month, Karmapa Rölpai came to the yuan capital of Daidu, which is the present-day Beijing. And when he arrived there, he stayed at a place called the Blue Temple. So, no, I'm not certain what the Blue Temple is called in Chinese. No, he gave empowerments to the emperor and the crown prince. He gave the emperor empowerments of Vajrayogini and the teachings, including the 6 yogas of Naropa and the co-emergent yoga of Muhammad. He gave the crown prince, in addition to the empowerments he had given the empowerment, he gave him the empowerment of Gyalo Jatso, teachings on the 100 Dataka tales, the root commentary of the Sublime Continuum, the root commentary on the written commentary on the ornament of the sutras, and the written commentary of the Kala Chakra, and as well as the related Indian texts. He also gave to other members of the royal family, as well as to the great ministers, as well as all of the important people and leaders and monastics among the people from the China, the Mongol, and the Uyghur, the Tangut, the Korean. So at that time, Korea at the time was in the Goryeo dynasty. This is during the Goryeo dynasty, so it's so that's called Kaori also in Chinese. So, and he taught teachings to all of these people as well as to many common people. Now, the duration of his visit was probably 3 years. No, I think it's probably actually 2 years if it was over the course of 3 different calendar years. That is the length that he stayed. And one day, Karmapa Rölpai Dorje said to the Gugong Rinchen Pal, he said a dream that the political situation of the Yuan dynasty is not so good, it's not so stable, and that the emperor will not live much longer. And so because he had that dream, so even if we continue to stay, there's nothing we can do to stop these, to prevent these bad situations from occurring. So we should make strong requests to return to Tibet. And as we return to Tibet, we can help many people along the way. And so he said this to his attendant, Gugong Rinchen Pal. And so he then made many requests to the emperor and the crown prince repeatedly. He made the request, but they didn't give permission. So one time when he was making the request, the crown prince Huang Tai then shed tears and said, "Precious Guru, please, absolutely, please stay no matter what. Hold us with compassion," he said. So the crown prince, so this is the first time that the Yuan that a member of the Yuan dynasty shed tears for the Karmapa. Then there's two ministers, and they're probably among the better ministers, the greatest. They came to the Karmapa, they prostrated him, kneeled before him, and made the request. And they said, "And Guru, from the time you've arrived until now, then all the epidemics in the kingdom have stopped. The crown prince had a son. Now, at that time, is the end of the Yuan dynasty. So at that time, there, from all sorts of different directions, there were a lot of conflicts and rebellions happening from many different regions. And so during the time that Rölpai Dorje was there, the rebellions were subsided for a time, and the continuum became more prosperous. And the emperor and the crown prince had both requested him to stay with tears in their eyes. What the common people call you to is the auspicious guru who brings good crops, because at that time the crops the crops grew well, so they called him the auspicious guru who calls them the good crops. This is really all a good sign. And so in a situation like this, in a time like this, so why are you so insistent on going back to Tibet? And so wouldn't it be better if, like the Jogan Chudya Papa and the Emperor Sechen, Sechen is, what was his name? I've forgotten his name. My brain isn't working so well today. Sechen Gebel has a name. Sechen Emperor had named. So one was the emperor and one was the king, and they had a very said that he should have a relationship of the emperor and the teacher, and they should spread the teachings like that. So please think about this carefully. They also said he should engage in political activities. Rinpoche Dorje said he gave things. He said you've made a very good, you've made a very nice request, but one day, then at the time there was a but he says sometimes, like when you have when you're having a sporting event and when everyone gets together, sometimes it's better to put an end to the spectacle. Otherwise, at the end, there's no one left if you continue to play. He said, I have done services and supplicated the three jewels on the behalf of the emperor and the crown prince, but I don't have any need at all for decrees or ranks related to political affairs, nor do I have any skills related to that. Monks should go wherever it's best and just do whatever he can to, for the sake of the teachings and sentient beings. If a monk stays in any one place and gets attached to that country, that's not good. So a good practitioner is one who is not attached to any country. And the two ministers really felt like there was a lot to learn from his words, and they actually recorded them in writing. And they saw Gugong Rinpoche saw them writing them down. So because he said he requested so earnestly they should return to Tibet. So he said that he was allowed to go for a period, but then in the future he'd have to return. And they also gave him many gifts to go, and they made arrangements for the travel, like horses and supplies and so forth. And now, before Karmapa Rölpai Dorje went back to Udsang, at that time in Udsang, there were the great gurus and the important people. He requested the emperor to grant letters and ranks and so forth for these people. And so at that time, there was a really great service, because at that time, at the time in Tibet, if you had the support of the Tibetan of the Chinese emperor, then your power would continue from generation after generation. Without that, then your descendants would weaken over the generations. Likewise, there was the monastery of Drögen Chögyal Pakpa in Nintao, and he asked to give that the Kempo Palden Chok of that monastery be given the title of Pakshi and a crystal stamp. And so this is and also there's the first Lord of Paktrut in Changjin Jason. So this is the time when he'd first taken political control in Tibet. So what Karma Trinleypa says is that someone had come from Tibet to slander him or to say various things about him to the Yuan emperor, to speak badly of him. And Rölpai Dorje helped explain the situation to the Yuan emperor and cleared up the matter. So the Lord of the Paktu had nothing to worry of anymore. And so he had been worried that the emperor might send an army or so forth, but he no longer had to worry about that. But Rölpai Dorje also requested that he be given the title of Taisitu for him, and so so he was granted that. And so this is a great assistance for the Lord of Paktu. And so after when the Paktu had taken power, then the Sakya declined. So at that time, so Rölpai Dorje also made a Dharma connection, received teachings from the Sakya Lama Dampatsunam Johnson, just helping praise and elevate him. And so this is also a really great benefit for the Sakyas. Likewise, 50 years before Rölpai Dorje's birth, in Utsang, there had been a local rebellion of Drikung and the Drikung. Now, I don't need to speak about this in detail, but there many people were killed. It's like it's not much to say about it, that other people were killed. And so from that time, there was a great feud and resentment between the Sakyas and the Drikung. And so Rölpai Dorje helped resolve the feud and rebuild the Drikung monastery and so forth. And so Rölpai Dorje helped spent some, made great offerings for that. And so he was also very helpful for the Drikung Kagyu. Similarly, he also made requests on the, to the emperor to benefit all of the great monasteries and great lamas within Tibet. And so when he came back from Beijing, he came through the region of Tangut, or Western Xia, and they got to the region of Gansu. When he was staying in Gansu province, many people came to see him, right? Now, some of them had traveled for up to a month, coming on horse or on camel. And so at that time, so Rölpai Dorje himself would do his meditation every morning and his prayers every morning. And so other than that, and when he was eating his meals, he was always giving blessings all day long. It was like they give the empowerments with his hands and so forth. And so there's 19 days from daybreak in the morning until the sunset in the evening. So he did this continuously for 19 days. And for most people to do this for 19 days without a break, you'd get very tired. But Rölpai Dorje said that he did this without any difficulty for many, many people. And then at that time, when I was staying in Gansu province, so this sits in the area of Gansu province. So in the region that is a little bit larger than the current Gansu province, but in that region, so at one time there was a large epidemic, and that similar to our COVID-19 epidemic. Well, it's similar. There was a large epidemic in the Gansu region, and many people died. And when many people were dying at that time, Gansu was also staying at the time in Gansu, so the attendants were also really very worried about it and thought there might be a danger. And so Guogong Rinpoche said that there's this great danger of the epidemic. So what should we do? Karmapa said, well, tonight I can have a lucid dream and see if I can do something about it. But don't wake me up. Because he was going off in his dream, right? So he said, don't wake me up. So after the Karmapa finished his evening meditation and prayers, Then in the middle of the night, so probably like midnight, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock or 1 a.m. So he went to sleep then. And at that time, Gogong Rinpoche stayed up watching while staying awake. Now, all of these secret all of these secret things were taught to Gogong Rinpoche because Gogong Rinpoche was always, he was inseparable from the Karmapa. So he knew everything that happened, but no one else knew about these because he said, don't tell anyone else. He said, don't tell anyone. Then one time, he's saying, so he started to write them down, thinking that it would be benefit of people for the future, and the Karmapa wouldn't let him. And so he said, because in the future, people will not believe. And if they don't believe, then they're going to lose faith. And if they lose faith, then they'll fall into hell. And so this is not good. And this is what the Karmapa said. Then one time, another Lama said, thought you should write a story, the amazing liberation story of the Karmapa. And you got all the paper and the ink. And the Karmapa said, bring me all the paper and ink. And when they brought it, then he threw all the paper into fire. You're about to lie about me. You're going to tell false stories about me. And if you write that, then in the future, and no one in the future is going to believe. And if they write things that the people won't believe, then I also become become false, and people are going to follow in the left. So he would fall to hell. So he wouldn't allow when he write about the motto. And so the reason why we have a few stories about some of his miraculous events is that after he wrote, Gogong thought to himself that if he so just a couple of them, then it would help other sentient beings. And he couldn't say it, couldn't bear not to him. So just a couple. So that night, the Karmapa went to believe, and Gogong stayed awake and stayed on watch so that no one else would come and wake up the Karmapa. And so just before sunrise, it's like this. There was like big clappings and booming sounds as if the building was about to collapse. Like talk, and all these really loud sounds. When those loud sounds happened, then immediately Rölpai Dorje woke up. And when he woke up, he said to Gogong Rinpoche, did anything happen above the house? And did everything? And Rinpoche said, oh, yes, it did. It sounded like there's such loud noise that I thought the house was about to collapse. Oh, if that's how it is, the Karmapa said, then the epidemic will not come to this region. It won't happen this, and even with the places where it is, it's going to go away. It'll stop. And Gogong Rinpoche says, how's that? What happened? What did you do to make it so that to end the epidemic? And at that time, Rölpai Dorje said, when he was asleep, he saw that the people who were sending the images were a lot of monsters. And the main one was a big, large, dark goddess, a huge dark goddess, a sort of frenzied goddess. And so what the Karmapa said is, I said that I became a huge Garuda bird with two wings that were so large that I could cover the entire Gansu province. I imitated myself as that. And so I swallowed all of the monsters and goddesses who were causing the dream, and I swallowed them all. And I had a blazing fire in my belly, and I burnt them into ashes. And then I had the feeling that I had defecated them all. And then after I defecated, then I was in the form of the grotto. I landed on the top of the building. Actually, this is a mental emanation. So it's strange that there are so many sounds at the outside because it's a mental emanation. So there's no form, but there was all the loud sounds. And he said that was kind of strange. but don't tell anyone about this, he says. So the actual situation was that the epidemic died down in Gansu, and everyone then became healthy. So while he was staying in Gansu, a lot of people came to make offerings. He received 5,700 horses and also oxen, gold and silver, silk, and other offerings beyond count. So many people came to give him offerings, and all the offerings he sent all the offerings to Uzang to make offerings to all the monasteries in Uansang with 10 or more monks to make 7 servings of tea and other offerings to this. And he sent a lama named Ryo Gampa to Uansang to do this. So at that time, and so at that time, almost all the monasteries had like at least 10 monks, right? So he made all of the offerings to them. So from that time until the 10th Karmapa, and so from all the Karmapas up to the time of the 10th, there was a great tradition of the making offerings to all of the monks of Dharma offerings to all of the different monasteries. Many of the Karmapas, when they were about to pass away, and so this time the Karmapa Rölpai Dorje also, without any bias or sectarianism, made offerings to all of the different monasteries and paid respect to them. And so I think this is an example of this wonderful tradition. Now, when he came to the region, as he left Gansu, came to the region of Tsongkha in the east. And so according to this is the time when he met Lord Tsongkhapa. So this time Lord Tsongkhapa was very young. And so at that time he gave him the novice vows and said, in the future you will need to go to central Tibet. He said, you need to go to Uzang. And so later Tsongkhapa did go to Uzang. And then he had the activity of becoming like a second Buddha for the teachings in Tibet. And so then the Rölpai Dorje told him, he said, if you do not stay here but go to central Tibet, then your activity will flourish there, as it is said. But in some stories say that he also gave him the novice vows and gave him the name Kunga Ningpo. Now, as Rölpai Dorje was returning to Tibet, he met Lord Tsongkhapa, who at that time was very young. So time out that there were a lot of people in the areas of different regions of Tsongkha who asked him to make to found a monastery and to stay there, but he did not accept. And then he went to the area of Gansu, to the city, what we call the Gansu Wu in these days. It's an area that we call what's called Tripide. So in that area, he went to now I'm not sure about there's a monastery called Yutang. If we translate into Tibetan, it's called the Bowl of Cream. And that's it. There's a beautiful spot there. They followed a mountain retreat called Paltsotra. And when he was there, then there was a lady. She was a lord and lady, right? So she was the wives of lords are called ladies, right? So this lady she had a dream, and in her dream, it said, build an image of the Buddha equal in size to a mountain, and you will. And this will fulfill the intentions of the great Prince Ratna. So this is probably, I haven't been able to find all the details on this, but this is a very wealthy patron. And so this lady, this great Prince Ratna had passed away, and so for the deceased prince, she should definitely undo this. And so she said, please, Your Holiness, please find a way to do this. And no, they looked at it, so they all went to this place, and they went to go see what the mountains are doing. If you have to make something the size of the mountain, you have to go first and see what size the mountain is. And it's an enormous mountain. It's just enormous. Oh, when they saw the mountain, then everyone was like astounded. It's like their eyes were rolling. They're just shaking their heads. Oh, there's no way. Can't be doing. How can you make an image of the Buddha as big as this mountain? They're just shaking their heads. And there wasn't even a single person who said, oh, there's a way to do it. At that time, the Karmapa Rölpai Dorje smiled a bit, and he said, there is a way. What you need to do, you need to make a large applique image of the Buddha out of silk. And if you do that, you sew it all together, right? And the Lamda thought, oh, this is something I can do. And she got all the gurus and the lords and the tailors and other craftspeople together. And she said, I said, we need to do this. We need to make a mountain-sized applique image of the Buddha. When they said that, now at that time, most of the traders were Chinese, and they're really very intelligent. But it's such a huge, as an enormous size. The idea of the Buddha, the size of the mountain, they just couldn't even get an idea of how to do it. It's like, there's no way we can do it. How can we make this? There's no way we can do it, they said. Because you need to make the design, right? Before you do it, you have to make the announcement. It's too big for them to figure out how to do it. They didn't know what to do. And so she goes back to see Karmapa Rölpai Dorje and said, now what should I do? And the craftspeople aren't even able to build it. What should we do? And Rölpai Dorje said, oh, there's no problem. I'll do something. I'll take care of it. I'll lay it out for you on the ground. That's what he said is. And so you have a river rocks, they're white, right? They're very soft and round, right? Smooth, round rocks. And he brought many things, and he brought many people, they're fist-sized walked rocks, the size of the fist, right? So he had many people bring these rocks. And they went and they had them arrange the rocks on the side of the mountain. What it says in the Feast for Scholars is the Dharma history. It says this is probably an oral history. It's not necessarily the actual history. At that time, Rölpai Dorje was riding a horse. And the horses have hooves, right? And so wherever the horse left a print, you should put a white rock there. And so as he rode his horse around, going around it in a circle, the people put a rock in every hoof print. And so when they finished, then they had the design of the Buddha. And so that way they did this, and it said, now you should make it this size, in these proportions. And so if you do it in this size and proportions, it'll be just right, he said. And he said, take that as a base, and they make them so the silk. And then you'll see the body and the rete and the ornaments and accoutrements, everything will be. You don't need to worry at all. So he made it, so this was like he rode the horse and putting down the things. He didn't, riding the horse. As one said, they didn't measure like we do these. It said, how many meters is it? How many centimeters? He didn't do it like that. Now, it's going to be really expensive. And because it's going to be so expensive. And so he's going to take, and he said he would give a tenth of the expense. So that's 10% or a tenth of the expense. And so he gave her 1,900 sang of silver. That's a 900 sang of silver. I don't know how many ounces of silver that is. I couldn't calculate it today because there wasn't time. In any case, Rölpai Dorje could create the whole design for the tanka, and then the lady ordered the 500 tailors she gave them the fabric and the silk, and they made them and had them sew the image. So now, how large was the image? From the ears, right? From the right ear to the left ear, there was 11 arm strands. See, there's the people at the right side. This is basically the size of 11 people. And so they made and so they had an image of the Buddha sitting in cross-legged. Then on his right was a Manjushri, on his left was Maitreya, both of them standing. Below them there was a citizen, then citizen above there the gods and goddesses making offerings. And the side they had the silk frame and so forth, and they spread it on the hillside, right? And then on a day with good astrological signs, the Rölpai was brought to bless, to consecrate it. And on that day, there are all sorts of miraculous signs, such as rainbows and shining lights, tremors of the earth, a rain of flowers, and so forth. So unless I show this to you, you aren't going to understand it, right? So this is a painting I've drawn, or an illustration of it, so that it'd be easy for you to see. So I think this is like the great silken tanka that they made. It's probably like that. Now the length of it was probably similar in size to the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Now, not just the tuka, but it's probably the size of the entire tanka. In China, this would be the sign of the Nanhai Kuan-yi Avalokiteshvara statue in Hainan. So at that time, it was like incredibly huge. So after they had made it, they offered it to the Rölpai Dorje. So when they given it, they had to bring it back to Tibet. So they brought it back to Tibet. So what it says in the Feast for Scholars, the Dharma history, is that the Buddha statue, the Buddha image was separated into 32 packages, and there are 8 packages for each of the side panels. And so, now the liberation story by Karma Kamtsang said that it had to be loaded on 44 zos, that is yak and cow and cattle crosses, and then behind that they had 22 other spines, and so they had other 22 others behind, ready to be loaded, because the zos couldn't carry it the entire time, and so they had over 60 or 70 zos. Probably just under 70 zos to carry the tanka. And once they'd arrived into the 2 side panels, one was given to Jikung and was given to the Pakshi monastery. And the main Buddha image was kept at Shoka and Kombo. Kombo Shoka, there's a monastery there, and that's where it was kept. But later it was damaged by fire. And so the different parts, they were all taken into pieces. And so there were 5 panels from the center of this that were missing. And so Khompa Chögyam had them remade at Sehlagang. But the rest of it was kept at Shokalhagang. And the rest were up in Sehlagang. So if we said, if we don't worry about things, so it's not, because the upper part of the body was in Sehlagang, the lower part is in Shoka, and said that the interdependence of this would create some difficulties of the Kamtsang. So it's important that this all be kept in one location, according to Pao Tsula Chengwa. So what is this difficulty that arises for the Karma Kamtsang? Is that during the time of the 8th Karmapa, there were 2 reincarnations of the 4th shaman. And it was the Karma Kamtsang was almost about to split into 2 schisms. It was a big conflict, a big controversy. And so that must have been what was meant, they thought. In any case, this great silk tanka is probably the first image of a large silk applique image of the Buddha in Tibetan history. And so the person who started this tradition was therefore probably Karmapa Rölpai Dorje. So now where is it now? Where is the great silk tanka? It's not there. So it doesn't exist anymore. If I've seen this in one history, when the armies of Kushi Khan arrived in Kongpo, there's this huge silk image. This is primarily the two side panels had gone to the other monasteries, but the actual image itself was in Kongpo, and because it was in the region of Kongpo, when the Kushi Khan's armies came up, they ripped it where they could. They ripped it apart, they burned parts of it, and they made clothes out of other parts as well. And so this is a really great disappointment. You're great. If there's something we'd actually see now, this is a really important historical artifact for for Tibetan people, and it's also a really sacred image for Buddhists. And so that is why I've had this drawing done as like a image of it, just to show you what it must have been like. It's kind of a, just to give you an overall idea of what it's like. And so on the top and the bottom, there's supposed to be people on the top and below, right? And Rölpai Dorje then went to the area of Dunhuang. So these are what we call the Dunhuang caves these days. So we went there. Now, at that time in Dunhuang, there are 3,700 temples. And among them, some had been built by Chinese emperors, some by the Mongol emperors, and some had been built by the Tibetan king Trilapa Chen. So Rölpai Dorje, when he was staying in the region of the Dunhuang Kavas, there people came to give him 100 or 1,000 offerings of horses and camels. And so at that point, there are two main images of Great Maitreya and two temples of Maitreya. So these are the most important temples. And so he gave eternal lamps that would be burned day and night. As he gave it as the principle to support that, and also to restore the temples. And so this is showing that there's a great connection between Rölpai Dorje and the Dunhuang monasteries. Then he went through the areas of Kham and down to Kongpo. Now, when he arrived in Kongpo, as the previous Karmapa Rangjung Dorje prophesied, he went to the sacred spot of Tsari. And he went to that main place and he opened it up. And so from that time, then many people would go to pilgrimage to Tsari, or there were retreats who would stay permanently at Tsari, and it became a very important and sacred spot. And so that is when Tsari became an important retreat and sacred spot. And he also went to pilgrimage to other sacred spots in Kongpo. And then he traveled to the north, to the area of to the north in the present-day region of Ngachukpa. He said we have to go to a really clean place in Sangpa. These are areas where it's a place with very little firewood. So he said, bring as much cedar wood as they could. And so to gather as much as you can, cedar, and bring it along. And what he also said, the third Karmapas, Rangjung Dorje's remains, was cremated with a wagon load of sandalwood and aloe wood. Now, the place where he was cremated was in the Mongol regions in China. So in sandalwood, there is no such sandalwood in Tibet. So in place of it, they used cedar. So they went to this beautiful grass-covered mountain in there, and to this place in Ngachukpa. And they said, if a pure bhikshu's body is cremated here, then the Chinese armies will not come to Tibet, he said. They set up an encampment there. And so then he also said several times, the savage beings of Adventure Time are really difficult to tame. And no matter how much Dharma I teach them, They won't enter the path to the Dharma. They won't go along the path. So what can I do to still world weariness in them? And so he did several times. He said this several times. And so as he said, then in the water pig year, when he was the age of 44, on the third day of the seventh month, he felt a little bit unwell. And from that time on, then there were earthquakes and rainbows and rains of flowers and so forth. And from the third day until the 15th day, he circumambulated the representations of body, speech, and mind 52 times. And in the evenings, there's the aspiration for rebirth and Sukhavati that we recite all those days. So the line that says, Great Maitre Manjushi Samanta Bhadram, Avlokiteshva Masampad, and so forth. May you can you accomplish great enlightenment? And so he recited the lines over and over again. So at that time they were in Changtang, so there are many animals, and so there are many wild animals who circumambulated it. And they had a large cremation up there. And so at that time, then all the animals came from all directions to watch. Later in that place where they held the cremation, they took all the rocks and stones and they made that stupa there, and it's and became a place where all the animals would gather according to Pao Tsula Chengwa. The animals would gather and circumambulate the stupa. And so that is a brief history of the story of Rölpai Dorje, explained in brief. Now, Rölpai Dorje had many students, many amazing students, and among them, as I mentioned before, I've been mentioned about Gwogong Rinpa. He was like one of the most important of his students. And he was... So when the Karmapa Rangjung Dorje was in the region of Dulung, this is an valley near Tsupo Monastery. When Rangjung Dorje was staying in that area, there were a lot of children who were gathering the livestock's dung. They're gathering it and playing in that. And then there was one of the chi that escaped from the encampment, and so all the children were afraid. And they just ran in all the directions. There was one child, he didn't flee, he didn't run away. And that time they had a basket for carrying the dung that they were carrying, right? And so he turned that upside, he sat inside, and he sat underneath it. He held it by the rope, and the key ran around it, but they couldn't bite him, and he couldn't find him. And so the dog then left. And so, what a clever child, they all thought. So everyone thought this is a really clever child. And that time, Rangjung Dorje said to the parents of that child, "Please give that child to me." And so at that time, then the parents then offered the child to Rangjung Dorje. And Rangjung Dorje said that he would have a very great influence on both politically and in terms of dharmas. And so for that time, and so that he was the Gwogong. This is the highest rank of the encampment, right? The Gwogong was during the time of the 13th, or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Karmapas, and so he had very great activity at that time. And he was also someone that all of the Chinese and Mongolian princes and all the great ministers and the Tibetan leaders all paid him great respect. They would only call him the Great Master. No one would call him by his actual name, Rinpa. He said that he was actually the one who had left the greatest impression, the greatest imprint on the teachings. And so he was the greatest student of. Now, it's not certain what his actual dates are, but he lived from the end of lived to the end of Rangjung Dorje's life. Later, he met Rölpai Dorje, received many teachings from Rölpai Dorje. So he was one. And sometimes I mentioned. Now, as I've been teaching about the liberation stories of Rölpai Dorje, I've read several old stories on them. The Siddha Panchen wrote the Golden Garland of the Kagyu biographies, and he said, so it's but there's There's a life stories written by Lama Hlateng. There's one by sort of Kunpang, Kunga, Lodrö, and Toten Kacherpa. So I've seen all of these, but the longest and the one that is the basis for all of them is the one written by Karma Kamtsang. So I've primarily taken that life liberation story by Karma Kamtsang as the basis for my teaching today. So Karma Kamtsang was someone who did meet Karmapa Rangjung Dorje, but he was primarily a student of the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje. He studied at the first Tibetan shadow, which is called Sampo, and became a very learned scholar. And so there was one time when Rinpoche, Shönnu, Lodrö, Kyabche Palsang, and Tsongkhapa Lobsang Dorje gathered, they had a great world of Dharma, and what they primarily taught us, the person who primarily taught it was Karma Kamtsang. There was also the So it's like the Trinleypa was enrolled with the Great Master as the teachings on the ornament of clear realization, Prajan, and the place where the person from whom they learned the Great Masters was from Karma Kamtsang. But Karma Kamtsang was his primary places was at a place called Karma Trinleypa, and so for that reason he's probably called, and I think that's why it's probably called Karma Kamtsang. So he stayed at the top of the Karmapa monastery, and so that is why it's called the Kamtsang. Writing the jewels is a literal translation. And so what he's now, but of course, the main student of the second was the second Shama Rinpoche, Kagyu Wampo. Yes, he was the second. The second, so the second Shama Kagyu Wampo was the main disciple of the fourth Karmapa Dorje. So that is a brief description of the life of Rölpai Dorje. And when you talk about the Great Encampment, you have to talk about Rölpai Dorje. And so there's several reasons. The first, as I mentioned before, the primary sacred object of the Great Encampment was the gondola that came during the time of Rölpai Dorje, and also a great. One particular feature of the Great Encampment is the rule that you should not eat meat or drink alcohol. Now, of course, all monasteries have the rule against drinking alcohol, but not eating meat is very difficult in Tibet. You didn't have vegetables to eat the way you do. You didn't have any greens to eat. So if you were not allowed to eat meat, then it's basically saying that you couldn't eat food. That's the situation at that time. But in the Great Encampment, there was the rule against eating meat, and that rule began at the time of the fourth Karmapa Rölpai Dorje, right? Similarly, within the Great Encampment, there are many rules that record with the Dharma, and so it's probably influence or related to Rölpai Dorje's intentions. And so, for that reason, I thought to give some sort of background information about the Great Encampment in relation to Rölpai Dorje's biography. And so now in the next week, I'd like to speak about the form of the encampment and the regulations of that. So I think that is enough for today. So now we will have the closing prayers.
Benjure Gigi Yuri Shabde Jo.